Okay, so our next section is about the labor movement since the 1930s. And I want to pull up some charts here that I think are going to help explain some of this. And this will be the first graph. This is from our last chapter, but you can see that going all the way back, 1897 now, right? That very few people were part of unions. It was very, very rare. Oftentimes it was guilds, it was skilled laborers, but that number starts to go up as society is changing. And in 1914, after the Clayton antitrust ruling, we see unions now, well, it's almost 20% of people. That's a fair chunk. But look at this. Yeah, after 1930, we're going to see that number get up to 33%, say. And although it's chopped all the way back down to almost 10% in our modern world, the heyday of unions, the glory days of unions existed right here. Okay, they existed from 1930 all the way until about 1970, 1980. Okay, and we're going to discuss why 1980 as well. Let's take a look at this chart, since I love charts and I love maps. We're going to see that one thing that happens when unions are in place is business owners who are incredibly rich. Well, some business owners, not all business owners, small business owners aren't all incredibly rich. My buddy Asa, he's not incredibly rich. He's fine, he does better than me, but I mean, he's not like incredibly rich. Elon Musk, incredibly rich. $200 billion, like more money than I could ever spend, incredibly rich. But look, they used to have, a huge chunk of the money. But when the unions started in 1930, we saw a leveling out. And during this glory period of unions, the bottom percent of Americans, as union membership went up, the top 10% ownership of the wealth of our country went down, okay? Because they had to pay people more, because unions make you pay your employees more, right? That's why I like my union. They help me get enough money so that I'm not scraping by, right? I mean, I'm not a rich person, believe me, teachers don't make that much money. And then you can see that ever since 1980, the top 1% share of the wealth has gone up dramatically. And the union membership has gone down. This is a pretty clear correlation, okay? When unions are strong, middle class does better. When unions are weak, top 1% does, top 10% does better, top 1% does better. And we'll get to this in a second. So Great Depression hits, 1929. The US and the rest of the Western world is in a horrible economic spot. In 1932, the US elects a president named Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt is going to come into office and change our country and our economy forever. And one of the first things he does is he brings in all the super rich business owners and he goes, hey guys, you can do one of two things right now. He was a super rich guy. Franklin Roosevelt was like Teddy Roosevelt's fifth cousin. I mean, he comes from money. When your family was once president, the guy was rich, okay? So he knew these people as equals. He goes, look, we're going to either go socialist or you're going to make some concessions to the labor movement. And they chose option B. They did not want the government to take over their businesses. And he immediately, when he takes over, passes a bunch of laws that help unions, that make unions stronger. And then he starts passing things like the minimum wage. That's Franklin Roosevelt. Thank you, Franklin, for the minimum wage. Our warm-up videos on the minimum wage, it suggested that when the minimum wage goes up, everyone's salary goes up, right? If right now, well, we have a high minimum wage because we live in a rich city. And look, I'm not trying to suggest that the minimum wage should be the same in the big cities as it is in small little rural countries and counties and states. Probably shouldn't be, right? It's really expensive to live in LA. Not that expensive to live in rural Ohio. So minimum wages should probably be different. Some cities should raise it, and the federal minimum wage. But either way, when minimum wage goes up, right now I think it's almost 15 bucks in LA, everyone's wage goes up, right? Because if you used to make right above minimum wage. If you used to make 20 bucks an hour, no, let's say you used to make let's say you used to make 15 bucks an hour, right? And minimum wage was $10 an hour. Okay. And then all of a sudden minimum wage goes to 15. Now, well, you used to have a job that was above minimum wage, but now it is minimum wage. And in order to keep their employees and not have their employees go somewhere else, these people are going to raise their salaries too. Or at least that's the theory that we've seen actually tested and largely come true. Now, is it also true that oftentimes raising minimum wage is going to increase the cost of the items? Yeah, it is. Okay. So that's one of these balances, right? How much should you raise it? When, where, how, why? All the questions or answers I don't have. Maybe you do. But we're going to see that the labor movement grows dramatically in the 1930s to the 1980s. Okay. And business owners were taking in less money, but they were still making plenty. They still had 30% of all the wealth in the country went to the top 10%. But now, like I said, that number is close to 50%. And at one point, it was closer to 50% before the Great Depression. Since in the 1950s and 60s, many jobs were unionized. You go out, get a job. People could, one job working at the factory could give you the American dream, right? The house, the 2 cars in the driveway, the white picket fence, the 2 kids, and marriage. Not my dream, the American dream, that as it was presented in the 50s. But you only needed one job, and it was oftentimes a union factory job that would afford you this. You won't do it today. You can't get a job at a factory and your wife doesn't, or your husband doesn't work, and you're paying all the bills by yourself, and you got 2 kids, and you got 2 cars in the driveway, and you got a house. No, right? Oftentimes, but people are working, and maybe you're not even living in a house. I think co-ownership is like about 60% in our country, meaning that 40% of the population, or about that, lives in apartments, which is not the American dream, unless it's your dream, and it is the American dream. But I digress. But we're going to see that in the 1980s, under President Ronald Reagan, this becomes an attack on unions. And one of the first things he does when he's president is there's the aircraft controllers, the people in the towers who like tell you to land your plane. They threaten to go on strike and they want to raise. He fires them all. Okay. Now these people are federal government employees. He has the right to do that. He's president. But it begins this movement where businesses are now going to try and eliminate unions so they can pay their people whatever they want. And over the last 40 years, we've seen union membership, let's take a look, no, I'm not just talking, drop dramatically. 1980, almost 30% down to 10%. And most unions are public sector unions. They're teachers, biggest union, policemen, firefighters, government employees, and private unions have dropped dramatically, even more dramatically, for like the factory or whatever. And of course, we've seen that the rich have made more money during that period. You can see here in this line here. The increase from about 30% of the wealth to about 50% of the wealth in the top 10%. Also during this period, we're going to see that some states do this thing where they create what's called anti-union backlash. And states become right-to-work states. This is a map of right-to-work states. If you are in the green, you're a right-to-work state. And if you're gray, that means that you actually allow unions. But right-to-work states mean that you don't have to join the union to get the job. Now look, there was actually a Supreme Court ruling a few years ago that says teachers don't have to join the union to get the job. But for a long time, they did. I couldn't be a teacher unless I paid my dues, because you guys are giving me my salary. And if I don't pay my dues, I'm what's called a free rider, where you guys negotiate for me and you get me a raise, but I'm not going to chip in my fair share. I want to have my, whatever it is, a month in my pocket, which is legal now for public sector unions, but it didn't used to be. And in these right to work states, that's what they say. They say people don't have to join the union. So most jobs, most factories, and they just say no unions. There are currently movements in our country, Amazon, McDonald's, where workers are trying to push for unions. Um, and in these right to work states, we're seeing that they don't have success. Okay, where maybe they're going to have more success if the business is located up here and over here. And interestingly, and I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but if you look at the, say, presidential election, okay, these states, both the same in this state, right? These states. And these states down here and in the middle of our country, except for Colorado and New Mexico, tend to vote the same. Is this a political issue? Is this Democrats in the gray versus Republicans mostly in the green? I don't know. Some would suggest yes. But either way, we've seen that there's been a push, a movement against unions. Public unions, you can see here, have stayed high since 1980, where private unions have dropped dramatically. Less than 10% of all private jobs are unionized, okay? Union membership has declined since the 60s. Private sector unions have seen, public sector unions have seen a huge decline, where private sector unions have stayed pretty stable. And each state is different. In New York, Hawaii, and Alaska, 1 out of 5 workers are part of a union. In Arkansas, North Carolina, and South Carolina, it's 1 out of 30. Okay, so again, southern states, we're seeing unions are just not there anymore. Where in some states, Hawaii, Alaska, and New York, 1 out of 5 unions are still strong. So what does all this mean, right? Just to wrap things up. Well, at first, when the Industrial Revolution began, there were no unions for 100 plus years. And then union membership rose. After the Great Depression, it rose dramatically. And after 1980, 1970s, but really 1980, we see union membership drop dramatically. And I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm a union member and I'm biased, but that's the fact. Just the facts, man. That's the fact.